Ridge of rocks through.
Yeah.
Nutchy boy.
Good
What a
luck.
beauty, yeah. Wow. What a beauty.
A large coalition of male lions has left a huge footprint on the Masai Mara in Kenya. A coalition of 6 big male lions called the Notch Coalition. They have ruled over an area of about 1,000 square kilometers for about a decade of their dominance. From the year 2008 to mid of 2017, the Notch Boys were the most popular coalition of male lions in Africa. They ruled over many prides of lions as they moved around over the years. Notch was an iconic black-maned male lion who appeared in the Masai Mara in the year 2003 along with his coalition partner. A year later they had finally taken over the famous marsh pride of lions. But Notch found himself being a single pride male in mid-2005 after his coalition partner was killed by intruding males. Several cubs had been born into the marsh pride sired by Notch and his partner in 2005. 5 males and 3 females to be exact. Against all odds, Notch held on to his territory for another 2 years. But in 2007, 3 new males muscled in and finally chased him off. Usually that marks the end of a male lion, as single nomads mostly don't survive long, but Notch did something very unusual. He did not leave his territory alone but took his 5 sons with him. These 5 young males were named Notch 2, Mighty Long, Ron, Caesar, and Grimace. They were expelled from their marsh pride lands in 2007, when the sons were around 2.5 years old. For a year or so, Notch took care of not only himself but also his sons. A year later in 2008, Notch and his sons returned and took the marsh pride back. But that wasn't enough for them. They conquered pride after pride, and at one point, they had 7 prides in total. There was nobody to challenge such a dominant force. They were the undisputed kings. From 2008 to 2010, they seemed invincible. But in 2010, the coalition lost the first member. Mighty Long was the first to go and vanished in the Mara Triangle. The remaining 5 were still a formidable force and were still the dominant males. 4 brothers under their father's guidance continued their impressive reign until 2013, when Notch himself never returned from a mission in enemy territory. Only a few months after Notch's disappearance, Grimace got lost during one of his excursions to find new females in enemy territory. The remaining 3 Notches finally settled down in the Lookout Hill area, still being a formidable coalition of 3 big male lions. The final chapter of the Notch's reign started mid-2016 when Ron went missing and never showed up again. He was killed by other dominant males known as Sand River males. A year later, Caesar developed a limp and lost condition. The reason turned out to be an abscess in his upper right hind leg. Vets treated him, but 2 months later, he was found being in a very bad state again and hardly being able to move. He was last seen lying motionless on the banks of the Mara River close to Lookout Hill. It was not a fight with other lions, it was not a conflict with humans. Caesar died naturally. With the demise of Caesar, there was only one of the Notches left. It was Notch 2. At an age of almost 13 years and being all by himself, his days seemed numbered as younger males were rising nearby. Notch 2 quickly vacated his last territory without a serious fight. He was seen wandering around what used to be the stomping grounds just a few years ago. Notch 2 disappeared and everyone speculated that he was dead. But it wasn't the end. The legendary son of Notch resurfaced once again and took a page out of his father's book. He took his son Spear Boy under his wing and as of November 2019, lives with him. He's 15 years old and somehow still holding on. It's safe to say that the Notch Coalition is one of the most successful lion coalitions of all times. The legacy of the Notches will live on as they have sired countless cubs, with many of them are now adults. They are now ruling over vast areas of the Masai Mara and beyond. The story of the Notches is an amazing story of truly wild lions, strong bonds, cleverness, braveness and pure power.
So everybody, Notch's story. Now this could take a while, so it could be part 1 of who knows how many episodes, because he arrived in the marsh. Well, first of all, who are we talking about? Notch. This amazing, beautiful, big black maned lion. And he had an incredible mane even when he was a youngster. Mane coloured varies according to the area. Sometimes you can, in the Mara, have blonde maned lions, ginger maned lions, black maned lions. Anyway, his chest mane was incredible. And if you look in this picture, this was probably about 2007, you can see his teeth are still in very good nick. So all of the lower canines, or rather all of the lower incisors are still there, and they eventually, they lose those over time, and the canines get worn down to stumps as well. So in my Big Cat Diary records, here we go, and you know, I'm a great diarist. I love scribbling and making notes. I think that background in zoology really helped me there. So I've always, when I first came to the Mara in 1977, I'd be out there with my notebooks recording details of what the animals were doing and identifying them as individuals. And that's what makes it really interesting, getting to know the individual. And every lion is very different. And so what have I written? So Notch and his companions, so Notch and another male, don't know if they were brothers, relatives, in 50% of cases in the Mara, in the old days certainly, the average number of males with a pride was 2. And of those 2 males, of that average number, 45% of those twosomes were not related. Now, you wouldn't have known it because when two nomads get together, they can't generally hold a territory on their own or take over a territory on their own. So power's in numbers. So a couple of young male lions, no longer being pushed out of their pride at sort of 1.5 to 2.5 years of age, meet up, contesting for food with hyenas and decide, you know what, the two of us together, even if we're a bit sort of iffy about each other, stick together, we can chase the hyenas, move around. And so they do that during their nomadic phase. And we reckon when Notch arrived in the Marsh Pride 2004 at about 4 years of age with his companion, it was probably his first time as a pride male. So cubs born 2005, new generation of cubs when they came in. And then mid-2005, Notch's companion was killed by 3 large male lions from Paradise Plains. They'd become across Rhino Ridge, moved to the north, and they found, 3 against 2, and they killed the companion. But a very interesting little addition to this story, because when lion researchers actually are trying to, find out how many lions there are in an area, certainly in the old days, one of the techniques was to use call-ins. So you'd drive around with a big loudspeaker and you'd play the sound of hyenas at a kill or lions roaring to get the lions in the area you're trying to count, to get them to come out of the woodworks because they're probably lying down, maybe all of them in one little place. And unfortunately, and that's why they don't use this technique very much anymore, is that when they played the sounds of roaring lions, 3 males from Paradise came over the rise and attacked Notch and his companion, and they killed his companion. Now, somehow, and I write about this here in an updated version of the Marsh Lions paperback by Brad, and I write here, in 2005, one of the 2 new resident males was cornered and killed by 3 of the Paradise Pride lions, but Notch, the surviving male, and Notch, he had a split in his nose. It wasn't too big or prominent to begin with, but eventually it got much more so. Anyway, so what I said, Notch, the surviving male, not only had 8 cubs to defend, he was also supported by some very capable adult lionesses. Just reading the names, all comes back to me. White Eye, Red, she used to be called Mama Lugger, BB, what a warrior, lived to 17 and then sadly died because of poisoning, December 2015. Another story to tell you about with a conservation element, and Lispy. 1, White Eye, Red, BB, Lispy, and would not give up his territory without a fight. So he stuck very close. He was smart. Keep with the females, they've no longer got a male companion, and move around where they move, and maybe keep your head down a bit, because obviously if you're doing a lot of roaring, and lions can count. Roaring's their way of communicating, telling other lions, friends and foes, how many of you, and where are we? Helps to space them. But believe me, lions, those Paradise males, would know there's 2 males down there and we can go and get into a rumble. There's 3 of us. So he probably didn't roar so much, or except when he's in the core of his territory, the heart, which you retreat to and defend most closely. So, while we had never heard of a male lion in the Mara managing to claim a territory on his own, now this is different. On your own, you can't go and take on more numerous coalitions to try and gain a pride. But if you're left on your own, you've got that group of females who you're bonded with, who you might, and the lights went out, you know what, we're going to break there, but I'll be back. Hi everybody, so we know what we're talking about today, don't we? It's that big boy Notch. So, just to remind you who I'm talking about, look at that male, I mean seriously. I would love to have hair like that. So, Notch. Why did we call him Notch? He had a split in his nose, and in fact it healed up after a certain point. And by the time that picture was taken from this book, done by chums of mine, and it's from the film African Cats. So Disney filmed Kali they called Notch, because the split had healed, in case you're getting confused and you've seen African cats. And they filmed that between 2008 2010, by which time Notch and his boys had moved away from the Marsh Pride and they'd headed down to Paradise, and they were causing chaos down there. It was sort of, 2008 was the beginning of their real move as a big group. But let's just go back a little bit. So back to the Big Cat Diary notebooks, which are there. And let me just read a little bit here from my notes as to what was going on. So we knew that Notch and Companion took over the Marsh Pride towards the end of 2004. And we estimate that Notch was probably born around the year 2000. So by the time he was in the Pride, by the time he'd moved into the Marsh Pride with his companion, he was about 4 years old. So that was 2005. So cubs born 2005. When he moved in towards the Pride, 2004. Cubs sired by him and his companion in the middle of 2005. And as I mentioned yesterday or the day before, his companion were killed by 3 males who were nomadic at that time. They came from Paradise. We think that probably they'd been drawn into the area by those calls, actually amplified by researchers who were trying to, unwittingly were trying to count the number of lawns, and those 3 males came over looking for trouble, heard roars, and they killed Notch's companion. Now, a very important thing to think about right here, because we talked then about Notch and his boys, so young subadult males who were offsprings of Notch and his companion. And we talk about them, a lot of people you'll hear talking about Notch's sons, but the fact is, we don't know whether Notch's companion was related to him or not. So we don't know whether Notch and his companion were related, because I think I mentioned 50% of cases in the Mara, certainly in the past, would be just 2 male lawns dominating the pride structure. And of those twosomes, that 50%, 45% of those were not related. But you wouldn't know it, because if you're a nomadic male and you don't have a companion, when you're forced out of your pride, you need to find somebody. And in that nomadic stage, young males will join up at times, unrelated, because force for lawns, the chance to take over a pride, depends on numbers. A single male in the Mara will not manage to take over a pride, or I've certainly never heard of it on his own. They might manage to stay in the pride after they've lost a companion, which is what happened to Notch. So those 3 nomads from Paradise came down, killed Notch's companion, and then he managed to stick with the females, White Eye and the other females, in the pride, and those 3 males moved away. And it wasn't until 2007 those same nomads, we believe, came back and chased Notch away, by which time there was a whole load of subadult cubs, including 5 males. Now, those 5 males and Notch in 2007, and Tamu, and that's a whole nother story, a female who had given birth to cubs when Notch was on his own in the pride, and one of which was actually killed by a nomadic male who took advantage of the fact Notch was on his own, came in, Bilashakalaga, found Tamu with 4 cubs, killed one of them, injured another one. 2 of those cubs survived. So when we moved into 2006, she had her cubs. 2007, the 2 surviving cubs of Tamu's were also 2 males. So when Notch left the Marsh Pride, ousted by, and the males that did it, the same ones that killed his companion, were Claude, Romeo, and there is Romeo. I mean, what a beautiful male. And the lionesses seemed to love Romeo. He was a Romeo. So Romeo and Claude, look at that. 14-year-old, we called him Claude because his nose and his face was just all clawed up. This was when he was 14, out on his legs, and he was killed. He broke into a boma. His teeth were so worn down by that time that he tried to kill a cow, could barely manage it, and he was spared. often happens with old males like that. They get into trouble with pastoralists, they get killed. So Claude, Romeo, and a third male moved in, the same ones that had killed Notch's companion, moved back down from paradise where they established themselves and chased Notch away. And Notch, Tamu, her 2 sons, and the 5 young subadult males, so now this is end of 2007, they went just trying to keep out of trouble at that point. And those subadult males, the 5 boys, were really at that time probably about 2 years old, that kind of age. And you hear later people talking about Notch's boys and saying, well, sometimes we saw 7 males together. Well, yes, 5 males, born around the same time, to Notch and his companion, who we don't know if he was related to Notch. So we can't really say those were Notch's sons, or Notch, or even that they were Notch and his, well, now let's get this straight. What we can't say is because Notch and his companion weren't necessarily related, it means that the connection amongst those 5 boys came between the females. So they probably shared either the same mother or mothers and were sired by either Notch or the companion. But the relatedness we can't be sure about. And so now they move out, they're pushed out. And in 2008, Angie was down on Paradise Plain, and this was 2008, this was during Big Cat Live. And the story of Big Cat Live didn't include Notch and his boys who were down on Paradise. And by that stage, those boys were now 3.5 years old. So by the end of, late in 2008, about that kind of age. And they were just awesome. Amazing to see those lions. And Angie kept calling and saying, why aren't you coming and filming these lions? Well, of course, unfortunately, we only had nighttime capability in Big Cat Live, and we couldn't move that far away from the epicenter, which was Governor's Camp, where we have our little stone cottage. And so Angie was just having the time of her life, getting wonderful pictures. And she, remember one time she was photographing out of one window, and then she had an open side where her main cameras was, and she looked the other way. And when she looked back, one of those boys was looking right through the open door, literally feet from Angie's face. You remember those moments, I can promise you. So back now to reading. So what happened? So now down on Paradise Plain, Notch and 5, sometimes people said 7, so those must have been Tamu's 2 sons. They eventually disappeared, and we ended up, because those other males were slightly older, and so Notch's boys, as we got to know them, and here's a picture of them here. Let's just have a look. So here's 4 of the boys there, trying to dig out a warthog. You do that, when times are tough. You can see they're about 3.5 years old. Their manes are not that big. And as I say, there were 5 of them, and they were sired by Notch and his companion. So they moved around that area, and now they're really growing into their own. And of course, what was interesting was the relationship between those 5 and Notch, because Notch was 4 years older, 5 years older than the boys. And those 5 boys, of course, the same generation, born from mothers and aunts, they were bonded like that, because that's what you do. When you're a subadult, it's all about you and your group, your cohort. So that's why it's so good when lion cubs are crashed and lots of cubs survive. If there's a number of males together, when they move out on their own, they know every element of each other's behavior. They know who can push who around, but they're bonded because their destiny is together. But now they're hanging out with the old man. And obviously there's a certain degree of tension, because they will know that he was the one that would have disciplined them and bullied them around at kills, taken the lion's share. So there's a degree, even though they're bonded, there's a different relationship between those boys and their father, or their relative, if he was a relative to some of them, because remember, his companion wasn't necessarily related to him, but there was tension. And of course, sometimes it broke out. But due to the relationship of, nurtured over time between the boys and Notch. I mean, just look at that. That's one of the boys. And sometimes the four of them, five of them, would just get sort of, put it mildly, pissy with the old man. Because as I say, their destiny, it's not usual for an old male lion to end up with his sons, and it's not ideal, So really, the destiny of those five should have been just by themselves, but Notch stayed with them. They were his bread and butter, and they were prepared to tolerate him for a while because he had this huge black mane, and that means something if you're a lion. He was a big brute of a lion, big, strong, powerful, and you would see him as there, going face to face with one of those younger males and standing him down. And when the others then, of course, rising to the challenge to help their young companion, came in as well, he'd turn and each of them would say, you know what? No, I don't think we can do this yet. We're not up to this. And so he managed to survive. But over time, he became more marginalized. He benefited from the area which the males were protecting together. So he had group membership and all the benefits that went with it. But he sometimes was by himself. Now, what were they hunting? Initially, 2008, they went into the Mara Triangle. They crossed the Mara River and they were hunting buffalo. But these lions became hippo killers. They didn't need the females. They were on such an agenda. They covered at one time 3 to 4 different pride territories. And so they were covering a quarter of the reserve, 400 square kilometers. So it was a massive area. 400 square kilometers, they were roaming around, impregnating females from the different prides, scaring the hell out of the resident males, chasing them away, and then they would move on to another pride. And so that meant that often they didn't put the attention and time into nurturing the scenario which would keep their cubs safe. And so they'd move to the next pride, spend time with them, come back. Maybe now they find somebody else had moved into the area, killed their cubs. They'd have to be pretty careful, pretty cocky to try and do it with those boys around. They're roaring because even if they're not there, you could hear those roars. That's why it's so economic. You don't have to be where you're sending the message. You could be 5 kilometers away where you're telling the opposition, stay out. This is our place. You know what? I'm running out of time. But this is a good story, so more coming up soon, because Notch and his boys were legends. Notch too, I just rang up one of my chums in the Mara and said, so Notch too, even a bigger, darker, better, just a crazy mane. Notch too was still alive at the end of 2019. That means the old man died in 2013. He was about 12, 13 years old, 13 max. Notch is 14, going on 15. I rang up my friend and I said, what about Notch? Because I saw somebody had posted that he was still alive, Notch too, still alive, end of 2019. He might just still be alive, in which case, come April, which was when he was born in 2005, he'll be 15. That's older than any male lion that I've ever heard of in the Mara. What a legend.
So cutie. Go.